show. Interestingly, I forgot my printed lesson plan, so I'm working off a computer screen. Samara? No, I'm sorry. Who's?
Oh yeah, no, it is.
Is Samara? Okay. You're against the light, and so all I'm getting is a silhouette. So I was half guessing. Thanks for joining us. All right, the recording's set, the slides up. I'm working from a screen today instead of my notes, so if I seem a little distracted over here, it's just because of that. So we've got 2 weeks of the homework photos in the can, so I'm not going to do all of them. I'm going to pick out some highlights, and then we're going to talk about the photo story assignment. And if I still have time, I might take a real quick trip back to the portfolio site just to hit a couple of things. So moving forward, from the homework, let's start with Alec Baldwin. This photo is not a current photo of Alec Baldwin. We know that because this is a current photo of Alec Baldwin. Alec, of course, was in the news. We know, I'm presuming everybody was aware of the shooting incident on the scene of the movie in New Mexico. So the first photo we see is a file photo that Fox News put up on their website to go with the story. And the second photo was captured by a newspaper photographer in Santa Fe, New Mexico, outside the police station following the incident. The reason I bring these up, the first photo is not a very flattering photo, and you have to question, why would Fox News go out of their way to pick a not flattering photo of Alec Baldwin? Anybody know why Fox News would pick an unflattering photo of Alec Baldwin?
Well, if they just don't like him, or if they think he's at fault, like just to make him look bad.
I mean, Baldwin is outspokenly liberal, a critic of the network, so what we have here is a really good example. A lot of people give photographs kind of a pass in the discussion of bias and ethics when it comes to journalism. A photograph is very often, by a lot of people, considered to be almost by default, if it hasn't been manipulated in all the ways we've talked about, to be a factual representation in and of itself, right? I mean, the photograph freezes a moment in time, and if the photograph hasn't been altered, it is factual in and of itself. I mean, the first photograph is a factual picture of Alec Baldwin, but when it's used out of context, it starts to blur that line. And so that's something we have to be careful of. That's what we do when we edit our photographs, is that we look at the photographs and we have to say, yes, this moment is a factual reporting of what's happening in that moment, but then the question is how we are going to present it. Is it still factual? I presented this lesson, and then I come in this morning and I pick up the Daily Campus. And right on the front page of the Daily Campus, under the headline, Student Burnout, a Rising Issue, is this photograph of a student studying in some sort of study space on campus. But the question is that student burnt out? Do we know that student is burnt out? It's a file photo. We don't know anything. It actually doesn't even tell us who the student is. So this is perfect timing to just point out that it's not enough to go out and take the pictures. We have to be conscious of the context in which our photos are being used. And that's why I put such an emphasis on making sure that our caption information is complete and accurate and factual, because those are what give the context to our photos if the photos themselves don't give a full context. So this is a really good picture of Alec Baldwin, a documentary moment directly related to the story that puts him in the news. This is the photograph that Fox News should have run with their story, not the unflattering, out-of-date file photo. So, on a semi-related note, since I'm not talking about aesthetics, let's look at this really nice, aesthetically pleasing photograph of two world leaders shaking hands. Everything is perfect in this photo. The light is flattering. The two leaders are shaking hands with, strong body language. Their faces are stern and earnest. Their national flags are behind each of them, beautifully lit. Everything about this photograph is perfect. Do you know why everything in this photograph is perfect?
It's a photo op.
Exactly. This is a photo op. This is a staged photograph. This photograph was taken by a news photographer. I know the guy who took this photograph. He works in DC. He covers all of the big news in DC. This is a situation where public relations professionals, in this case in the government, probably in the State Department, have staged all of this to make these two leaders look as good as possible. Now, I'm not blaming the photographer per se. He was assigned to cover an event, and this was what happened at the event. But we have to look very carefully, and it comes down to this. The National Press Photographers Code of Ethics is very clear, and it says, quote, photojournalists should resist being manipulated by staged photo opportunities. So if this entire event is nothing but a photo opportunity, then the choice then is, do we not cover it at all? Do we say this is a photo opportunity which is nothing newsworthy and we just walk away? In a competitive news environment, you know that's not going to happen. So the photojournalists need to go in there, I believe, with a bit of a skeptical eye, a little bit of concern as to whether or not they are, as it says in the Code of Ethics, being manipulated. So maybe there are moments within this photo op that are more candid. Maybe there are moments within this overall photo op that are not actually staged, where it is clear that whatever is happening is spontaneous. You look for those. And then this gets back to our photo editors, the ones who may or may not choose unflattering photographs of Alec Baldwin to go with stories. Do the photo editors decide that they want a flattering photograph that comes out of the photo op? We can surmise whether or not the general public understands the nuances of what's a photo op and what's genuine. And that's where the editors have to make a decision. This looks like a photo op. I think the vast majority of news consumers who look at this understand on at least a fair intellectual level that this is a photo op. So in that case, the editor says, everybody knows it's a photo op, it's a photo op. We need a photograph that just tells people that these two world leaders met. There's nothing we can do to undo the photo op-ness of this, so we go with this photo. But these are all things we need to think about. The photographer needs to think about them, the editor needs to think about them. So moving outside of the photo ops, I love this photograph. It's from a protest in Haiti, all the unrest going on there. It's a spontaneous moment of someone who's probably creating their own little photo op. But it's a really nice moment, and what's really nice about it, though, is just the beauty of the light, 3/4 to side light, which gives a really nice hard edge to everything. The smoke gives a really good background. It's not too busy, really tells you what's going on. The balanced composition really works very nicely. It's entirely possible that if we'd gone with more of a rule of thirds, that moving the image off to one side or the other would have created a more distracting background. So just overall a really nice image. I think the only thing I wonder is the caption says that he's taking a selfie, but he's not using the selfie cam because he's pointing the regular camera towards himself. So I don't know what he's doing. It's hard to tell. There's nothing on the screen, so I just don't know. But it's nonetheless, it's really a nice image. This is a really interesting picture too. I don't spend a lot of time on sports photography in this class. Sports photography is sort of a very specialized subset of photojournalism in general. It requires, by and large, very specialized equipment. It's nearly impossible to do really good sports photography with your iPhone. And so spending any time on sports photography in this class would probably be counterproductive. Most newspapers, even if they've eliminated virtually all of their photo staffs, still keep someone around who can do the sports photography because they recognize that just is beyond what's capable of the smartphone photographer. This is an interesting enough photograph. I just wanted to bring it up. The light is beautiful. The composition is nice. There's a whole lot about this photograph that's very aesthetically pleasing, And yet, from a sports photography standpoint, I'm not sure what story it's telling, right? I don't know if the two players in the foreground have a great rivalry. The caption really doesn't tell us anything about that. It just tells us that the teams played under the dome. So in the end, this is really more of a feature about the situation, about the stadium and the way the stadium affects the way the game is played, or at least the way the game is seen. So I really like the photograph from an aesthetic standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint. I think it leaves a lot to be desired, and in the end probably really begs the question of, how much more caption needs to be written to tell us about what we're looking at. And then just some general news photographs. This is a nice vaccination photograph to go with a story on the continued efforts to get people vaccinated. I might personally, if I were editing this photograph, might crop a little from the top to take out that exit sign. I don't know that we need to know where the exit is or know that there is an exit in the room. And by taking it out, it lets the eye come much more readily to the interaction. It's nice that it doesn't show the needle in any detail. There's been a lot of discussion in the journalism community about how much the focus very early in the vaccination effort on needles going into arms may have triggered a lot of people's needle phobias and may have actually hurt the vaccine efforts. So photojournalists have been making an effort to get a little less detailed, a little less graphic. And then the other thing I might do is I might come in a little bit on the right to just balance the composition and put the interaction between the vaccinator and the patient dead center instead of slightly off center. But that's really kind of nitpicking. It's a nicely composed photograph, a nice moment. We talked a little bit last week about motion blur and slow shutter speeds. We specifically talked last week about the technique of panning and how one can follow a moving subject with the camera to keep the moving subject in focus. This is essentially the exact opposite of panning, where a slow shutter speed is used to give the sense of motion while keeping the camera steady on what is actually the real subject, which in this case is the sign telling you the price of gas. In this case, back in France, so I'm presuming that's per liter. I'm going to try and translate. 2.2 gallons per liter. I think gas prices in France might be a little higher than they are here. Anyway, but the point is the blur technique, the slow shutter speed is used to let the traffic show motion while the camera is held steady enough so that the sign, which is essentially what the photograph is of, is nice and steady and sharp. And then this one. We had a few weeks back, we had that really beautiful nighttime refugee photograph out of Afghanistan, the light and the airplane silhouetted against the night sky, and all of that stuff was just, I loved it. It was a PR photograph released by the military, and we discussed what that meant. This, on the other hand, is a journalist's photograph, but the whole world seems to be falling over to the right. This is a really good example of, quite frankly, what I call what happens when a photographer loses confidence in their own ability. Now, the photographer might argue that point, but the reality is the photographer felt it was necessary to create this crazy, dynamic, skewed composition so that the tail of the airplane and the moon in the background and the line and all of that would fit in this very specific shape. And in the end, I think the tilted horizon like that becomes a distraction. It's very difficult for a person to look at this photograph and focus on what the photograph is trying to tell you because you're too busy trying to figure out why everything isn't sliding off the side of the world. So we went over in the Photoshop discussion how to fix a tilted horizon. This one is probably too far gone because in this case the photographer intentionally turned the camera sideways by 35, 40 degrees. So I will just say you may someday in your career find an editor who likes this technique. I won't be one of them. So Any questions on those before I move on? All right, give me a sec here to catch my breath. All right. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit here and talk about the photo story assignment. This is the final assignment of the semester, and I know that's still a few weeks away, but the simple reality is that the nature of this assignment is one that you're going to want to start thinking about it sooner rather than later. For the single news photographs, you might be able to get away with the very last minute running out and grabbing a photo. This assignment is going to require some advanced thinking, maybe a little advanced legwork, and so I want to talk a little bit about what it's about and some of the process. So for the purposes of this class, a photo story or essay is a collection of photos. Back up there. A photo story is a collection of photos, for the purposes of this class, 5 to 7 photos. So in the wider world, a photo story or essay can be fewer, or in most cases, a lot more. What you're seeing on the screen are a couple of screen grabs of just some contact sheets from my website of a couple of stories that I've done. Each of those are a lot more than 5 to 7 photographs. That will all depend in the end on how much access you can get and how many different photos you can make within the context of the story. So a photo story, sorry, while I catch my breath here. So a collection of photos, it either tells a story about a single person, place, or event in a linear fashion, or it creates an essay about a subject that is tied together by thematic element or issue. So the difference can be very subtle between the story and the essay concept. I'm not going to be really picky in this assignment as to how good of a job you do tying the theme together. At this point, the assignment is much more about taking the time to think about a subject more in depth and to capture a variety of photographs. And so to talk just briefly about the history, all right. For much of the first half century of photography and photojournalism, the single photo was widely considered to be the defining model for the medium. Obviously, almost for purely technical reasons, for the first half century, photographers really could only take one picture at a time, and it was difficult to take a whole lot of photographs over a period of time because it involved a lot of physical effort to carry around enough film and holders and all of the logistics required. With the advent of Life magazine in 1936, this began to change. The idea that one could tell a story with photographs and little text was revolutionary, but also proved to be immensely popular. Life magazine sold out on newsstands all over the country every week. It would come out and people would rush to get their latest issue of Life magazine because they wanted to look at the pictures, which was mind-blowing to people who thought that people only ever wanted to read about things. So we talked about W. Eugene Smith at the beginning of the semester, and so the name will be familiar. He came home from World War II from covering, the horrors of war, and proceeded to create, or at least popularize, the idea of the photo story as a form. In 1948, Country Doctor, I will go backwards, was published by Life magazine. And it is cited even to this day as a seminal example of the form. All right, Smith spent several weeks shadowing this doctor as he visited patients in around Kremlin, Colorado in 1948. The variety of the situations, the variety of images, the intimacy of the moments all created a stir. Up until that point, most of photojournalism was pretty superficial, mostly kind of from a distance, and this became a level of intimacy that people had not really experienced before. Smith went on to publish many such stories for Life, and then as a member of the Magnum Photo Agency. his story on the mercury poisoning of the residents of the village of Minamata in Japan in the early 70s was his last major work, but in many ways considered to be his most significant. The village of Minamata was being poisoned by mercury being released by an industrial plant into the waters. It was in their drinking water, it was getting into the fish they were eating, it was causing illness and birth defects among the population. The people of the village actually wrote to Smith in the United States and said, please come and tell the story of what is happening to us. Anyway, so and Smith did that. This was in the early 1970s. He spent months in Minamata documenting both the pollution and the effects of it, and eventually his story led to change. The plant was closed, the pollution cleaned up. There are still people alive today who suffer from that poisoning, but there are not new people being poisoned, and that was the effect of a really classic example of the power of photojournalism to affect change in our societies. So here in the slideshow, and I'll go ahead, I'll post them on the Husky CT as well. From the Magnum website, you can actually look at the entire Country Doctor photo essay. You can look at a significant cross-section of his Minamata work. Since he was there for so long, there's actually a book. Also included here are links. Jessica Rinaldi of the Boston Globe won a Pulitzer Prize a few years ago for a piece called The Life and Times of Strider Wolf. You should look at that. That's a really good example of contemporary photojournalism, photo story. And then the other link there, Greg Reck, who's a photographer from the Portland Press Herald, a Connecticut native. Greg did a really nice photo essay on wintertime recreation in Maine. And so that's a really good example to look at the differences between the story, which will tend to be linear and tend to follow a single person or narrow set of subjects over a period of time, and the essay, which will be more thematic, focused on, say, a season or a larger geographic area, and less tied to a single individual or place. So there are also some other examples I've included in the links here. These are from the National Press Photographers Clip Contest. Several of these are essays. The first one there, just a U-pick produce stand. The next one, an essay on a state park. So like I said, a wider geographic area, not a very narrowed focus on an individual. The next one is a story, maybe more essay form, on a cemetery that has become a refuge for people who were looking for a place to be during the pandemic. There's a certain irony in that juxtaposition of using a cemetery as a refuge during a pandemic, which I thought was interesting. The next one is a very straightforward day in the lifestyle story that just follows a letter carrier through their workday. It's a common trope in photojournalism, the day in the life thing. You can expand that, and you could do, for instance, a day in the life of University of Connecticut, which would be an awfully big task for one person, more of the kind of thing that a group of photojournalists might do. But the day in the life of the letter carrier, a small story here on a flower farm that's shifting its business model. And then the last link there is just a link that would take you to the page that you could look at lots and lots of them if you wanted. I'm actually going to step back. Let's step back really briefly because I wanted to read this one and I forgot to. So Mike Davis is since I typed this slide up, I've realized, of course, he used to be a professor at Syracuse University, ran the Alexia Foundation, which is a educational program that looks at photojournalism and awards people for doing really strong documentary work. He's since left academia and gone back into private freelance work. Anyway, Mike Davis is very much the contemporary professor who embodies a lot of the thinking on photojournalism and photo stories. So I like to just share this quote because it's a good starting point for your thinking when you're thinking about a photo story or essay. and I will read it because that's what I do. A lot of people say a picture story has a beginning, middle, and end, whereas a photo essay doesn't necessarily. Not exactly. I'd say a picture story tends to be about one place or person or situation, where an essay tends to be about one type or aspect of many places, things, or people. Regardless, each type of story requires the same thing, a thread that holds them together. The thread can, and should, vary widely from one story or essay to the next. You could make pictures of thousands of guys with beards, but not have a cohesive body of work unless something other than beards makes the images relate to each other, for instance. Or you could follow one person's life for years and still not have a set of pictures that tells a story if you don't have a narrative in mind. So it comes out of a longer essay from his blog. I certainly suggest going and reading that. And that is it for that. Any questions? The details of the photo story assignment are on Husky CT with a further explanation of exactly what's expected, though I can go ahead and say it. So 5 to 7 photos. You're going to want to narrow your subject down to something that you can encompass in a fairly small amount of photographs. You don't want, especially for this class, given the time frame we're up against, you don't want to try and go too big. You want to pick something fairly simple. Any number of those examples is a good place to start. 5 to 7 photos. Just like the single photos, you will email me the photos and the captions, and you will post them on the portfolio website. Ideally, you might want to create a single post just for this and put all of the photos together in one post. And other than that, what I would say is, if you are having trouble with ideas, or if you have an idea but just want to bounce it off me, please do so. Do not leave this to the last minute. Do not leave this to 2 days before it's due, because you're going to find yourself scrambling and it's going to hurt the quality overall. If at the very least, have the idea well in place and thought out before we get to that point. If you have to shoot it at the last minute, if you've thought it out in advance and have a really good idea and are really confident you're going to be able to pull it together, that's good training for journalism. Yeah.
So say we choose to follow a person.
Uh-huh.
So then is it okay if the pictures are staged?
No, then you need to follow someone through a candid example of their life.
Okay.
So it can be difficult. Anytime you impose yourself and your camera into a candid situation, obviously the fly on the wall aspect will come into play. It may take time for them to get used to allowing you to see things as they go. It's not unusual for me or any photojournalist to say, stop posing for me, just do what you do. Just pretend I'm not here. And eventually, I think I may have said this in a previous class, eventually they get tired of trying to pose for you. If they're not getting a return on their investment, if they pose for you and you don't say, oh, that was great, then they're not going to feel like that's what they want to keep doing. They're eventually going to get bored posing, and they're going to realize they need to do what they need to do because they can't keep putting their life on hold just for your camera. I'm here to document what you're doing, just do what you do. Pretend I'm not here, do what you do if I weren't here, try to ignore me. Any of those things are going to come into play. But yeah, it's somebody in one of my previous classes went to a bakery, and the baker is just like, oh, what do you want me to do? Well, do what you do. Pretend I'm not here. You're running a bakery, bake. If you need to, you point out, you just say, hey, I can make the pictures as you go. You just go. Pretend I'm not here. I'm not here. I'm a fly on the wall, and everything will be fine. Don't worry about what I'm doing, because I'm the one who's worried about what I'm doing. You worry about what you need to do. All of that kind of language. So that leads me to that, and I'm going to go ahead and restart this because I did want to. Last semester, this specific class lecture came in the middle of March, which was Women's History Month. So the readings I pulled for this class last semester were related. One of them you already have is the story on Jessica Rinaldi. This is a different link more about her work and some awards she's won. Then the other two are very specific historical looks back at women who have been trailblazers and major influencers in photojournalism. So we're going to pretend this is Women's History Month revisited as the excuse for this specific set of readings. So, and I could actually, let's see, right? I can show you. This is Country Doctor. Like I said, we saw a few of these images, or at least one of these images earlier in the semester, but I think this is very worth looking at. You look at a variety of images. He's doing a lot of different things, working with different people. But the level of intimacy that took place in this story was revolutionary at the time. Like I said, most people saw photography as pretty superficial. Photo ops, groundbreakings, check passings, things like that were what most people were used to seeing. And Life magazine started to publish more intimate photojournalism, and then Smith came along with this story, which showed us things including, people in their most vulnerable, people dying, things that were just unprecedented at the time. So, and just the human element, the doctor sleeping on his own gurney in his own clinic from exhaustion from the amount of work he had to do. And then really quickly we can look at some Minamata. There's been a movie made about Minamata and Smith. Johnny Depp plays W. Eugene Smith himself. The movie has been released overseas. We're still waiting for a release date here in the US. Apparently MGM, which made the movie, is in the process of being acquired by Amazon. And apparently Amazon has decided to put a hold on the release. Nobody knows if that means they're going to just stream it instead of putting it in theaters. Nobody knows if it's because they gun shy about Johnny Depp because he's vaguely controversial. This is a level of storytelling that obviously is well beyond what you can be expected in this class. Like I said, Smith spent many months in Japan. He actually was attacked by goons hired by the company trying to chase him off instead of continuing to do his work. So, but you can just see the variety of work, the kind of things. So, what is this? Oh, I was going to show you this, but oh, there it is. Okay. And then this is Jess Rinaldi's Pulitzer Prize winner. Strider Wolf was a young child in the backwoods of Maine who was in the care of his grandparents. And the story was primarily about the poverty that this child was growing up in, the challenge of these older people trying to raise this child who was developmentally, behaviorally challenged. But Jessica spent a long period of time in Maine documenting this child's life and what was going on around him. So, and just, a really good example of sort of the variety of images that gives you a real sense of what this child's life is like. I'm not particularly thrilled with the way the photos are displayed in this website, but once again, a really good link to look at. And then this is Greg's Winter in Maine piece. As you can see, the main thematic element of this is winter and Maine and not focused on any specific individual. He basically just went up some ski mountains and made some really stunning photographs. But once again, this is very much in the essay bent that I was talking about, not not a linear story being told, but it's all cohesively tied together by that one thematic element of winter. So, and I have just enough time. I want to talk really quickly just about, I want to do this. Go ahead and just create another new post while I'm at it. Sorry, while I try to remember which. Actually, I'll go ahead and do it. I'll do it the other way. I'll just edit a post and show you what I wanted to show you. So, this is just something I've already noticed a couple of the photos that have come in. And actually, stepping back again, I'll do this from a page instead of a post, just because it's easier. Right. So when you've got a photo on a page, all right, when you click, I've noticed a couple of the ones that have come in, the photos on the pages have been very, very small. And you want to avoid that primarily because if the point of this site is that you're making a portfolio and you want people to really be able to see the photographs. So when you put the photograph on the page, you have some options in front of you about how the photo is displayed. And I just want to reiterate. So once the photo is on the page, you hit that little pencil icon for the edit, and that gives you this combination of options. The primary one that you're looking at is the alignment, where it appears on the page. And I'm going to once again, if the photo is standing alone on a page, you want to center it. And then you really want to pay attention to what the size it is. Your site may be set as a default of a thumbnail, or maybe set for a small or medium, depending on the size of the original image as you've uploaded it. You want to go ahead and go with the full-size image. That's as big as it's going to be. So if your image is a full-sized frame, full resolution, you go ahead and choose the full size. And then depending on the size of the image will depend on how it actually displays. But then you hit update, because if I shrink this, if I go down to thumbnail and hit update, see what happens to that photograph? It's no longer really a viable display. Some websites will display a thumbnail and allow you to click on the thumbnail and increase the size of the image, and that's fine. This website, if you don't put it in full resolution on the page, it's going to be this tiny little picture like a postage stamp, and that's not showing off your photographs. So that's what I really wanted to focus on. You really want to make sure that the images are being displayed as large as they can be on the site. So, I don't think I have it open, so, right, so that was just a bunch of photos, right? So you want the photos to be big, you want them to display well. The verticals are going to be much more dominant just because of the dimensions of the website page, but even these smaller horizontals are reasonably well displayed, and so you want to go ahead and make sure you're going with a full resolution as opposed to one of those smaller sizes. Any questions on that? All right, so I think that's it. Make a point of looking at those links. Yes?
Are you able to post a link just to your site just to see like kind of how we should organize it?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Are you able to post a link to your site just to kind of
Yeah, absolutely.
see how we should be
Yeah,
organizing
I will
it?
do that. I will post a link to my portfolio site as soon as I get home from here. Yeah, I will do that, not a problem. Probably should have done that before now. Thanks for suggesting it. So if there are no other questions, that's what I got for you today. Like I said, start thinking about the photo story essay now, even if you're not going to start shooting it for a few weeks. Because you don't want to leave that to the last minute. You still got 2 more regular photo assignments due next Monday and 2 Mondays. So With no further ado, we will call out a class. Thank you all for coming.